Today on Damian on Design, we take a look at the impact women have had in architecture and in design.
Right.
Damian Farrell, good to have you back with us.
Oh, it's always wonderful to be back.
And Ashley Flintoff is our special guest today, an architect, and she is project manager over at Smith Group JJR. What a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show today.
You are well versed in Smith Group JJR, aren't you?
I am,
Damian?
because Carl Johnson, who was one of the founders of JJR, is the person who brought me to this country back in 1987.
From South Africa?
From South Africa. He and I worked on a project together in South Africa in the late 70s and early 80s. And so he was really a mentor and a father, and passed away last year, unfortunately. But a very, very dear friend, very close. So.
And Ashley, this is one of the oldest architecture firms?
Right, we're the oldest, or the longest operating architecture firm in the country. And we've been partnered with JJR for several years now, and just last November we rebranded as Smith Group JJR to offer a more complete service to our clients.
And you're located where in Ann Arbor?
Our office in Ann Arbor is on Depot Street.
Okay, and that's where Barracuda is?
Yes,
and
yeah, it's in the new
Bill
building
Martin's
that was
building.
in Bill Martin's building, the one that has the piece of railway
Right,
out in front of it, yeah.
right, just down from the
Right.
depot.
Yeah. But I think it's also important to mention that Smith Group, which used to be Smith Henchman and Grills, Michigan-based, founded, started in Detroit. So one of the firms that we're very proud of, at least as Michigan architects. Great firm.
Absolutely.
Great
That's
history.
wonderful. The Beverly Willis Architecture Foundation is something that Ashley is part of
Right.
and very proud of as well. What is this foundation?
The foundation is actually started by Beverly Willis. It's based in New York City. And the whole goal of the foundation is to promote women in architecture, to rewrite the narrative of architectural history, to include women who have been previously excluded or set to the side, and to just really support diversity and inclusion in the field of architecture.
Is there a long presence of women in architecture?
There actually is. I actually have this little women rulers of 20th century architecture
It's
ruler.
on a ruler.
Yeah, it's a list of some influence, not all of them, obviously it's not conclusive, but starting with Louise Bethune in 1856. So, I mean, women have had a really profound impact on the design industry for many years, and just we found that the narrative just needs to be rewritten. For example, there was an architect who worked for Frank Lloyd Wright, who's actually a part of the documentary that I think we're going to talk about in a few minutes, who in the history books she's listed as his bookkeeper. But if you go back into the archives, Frank Lloyd Wright actually wrote a letter to the American Institute of Architects saying that without a doubt she is the best architect that he knew, and he would highly recommend her to anyone looking for an architect.
Isn't that something? But history
But the history
stipulated
books
something differently.
stipulate her as just a bookkeeper. But she was one of the first women architects that he hired, and she worked with him for, I believe, 14 years.
Tell me about the video that
So
has been produced.
The video is a documentary. It was written and produced by the Beverly Willis Foundation. It's called 100 Women Architects in the Studio of Frank Lloyd Wright. And it's named after a quote by Frank Lloyd Wright, who basically said, "A girl is a fellow here." So in his studio at Taliesin, all of the architects and interns that worked for him were called fellows. And he employed more than 100 women in his studios in Chicago and in Taliesin in Wisconsin and Taliesin West in Scottsdale, Arizona.
So not only progressive in design, but progressive in many other ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
He looked at everybody as equal. Everybody did the same work. Everyone worked on the farm at his studios. They worked in the studio. He didn't really discriminate. Everybody was equal.
Right.
Ashley Flintoff with us, and the organization again is the Beverly Willis Architecture Foundation, and Ashley is project manager at Smith Group JJR. Damian Farrell from Damian Farrell Design Group on the air with us each Saturday here on 1290 WLBY.
Actually, let's talk about just a couple of women who are on that list, because it's not just architecture, it's the impact that some of these women have had on product design and things that people would today know, names that people know,
Sure.
Knoll, for instance.
Sure, the
Eames.
two names,
Yeah.
the two names that come to mind immediately, Florence Knoll and Ray Eames, both of whom studied at Cranbrook in Bloomfield Hills.
Yep.
And had a profound impact on the world of product design and textile design. Florence Knoll is very well known for her textiles and for her furniture. Her company, Knoll, is a furniture company still based in Michigan, still producing in Michigan, and they're known around the world. Similarly, Ray Eames, who teamed with her husband Charles, were two of probably the most famous product designers,
absolutely.
graphic designers,
Right.
industrial designers, I would think anywhere. They've created these iconic designs that just, to those of us in the design industry, these are collector's pieces. These are things that you they're in MoMA in New York City. I mean,
Right.
they're in museums, they're everywhere. And yet it's inaccessible. I mean, anyone can go to Herman Miller and buy an Eames design. They're still producing them. Anyone can go to Knoll, buy a Florence Knoll design or a Florence Knoll textile. So it was all about, for them, it was all about taking design and bringing it down to a universal level, making it accessible to everybody and making it work for everybody. So the Eames designed chairs that were comfortable for anyone to sit in, and it was based on the human body.
Actually, Damian, it occurs to me as I hear you talk about the accolades of women in design and in architecture in particular, that, you know, we think about certain fields being male, female, but we're really trying to come together in a societal
very much so.
way.
Very much so.
Absolutely.
And in this case, though, to me, if someone's artistic, if they have that creative bent about them, I don't think of that as male-female, because that is just something special that happens to
Yeah, very much so.
to creative people, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So what is it about the industry, though, that would have led it in the early days not to embrace women?
I think it was more of a societal
Right, yeah.
infrastructure more so than the design. Because if you look at pure design, I mean, even around the world throughout the ages, pure design knows no gender. It doesn't know a race. It
Right.
doesn't know anything. It's purely about design. I think where the narrative kind of got off track, if you will, is society. I mean, if you think about the early 18th, 19th century, it was a male-dominated society. There was more of an emphasis. People didn't believe that women were strong enough or capable enough to do design. And then you have these pioneers, you know, that are on this ruler, like Ray Eames, like Florence Knoll, who kind of broke the barriers and said, you know what, I can do this, and I can be just as good as you. And I think what helped too is a lot of times these women were in situations where they could kind of push the boundaries, and they had strong personalities, and they just said, I don't care, I'm going to do it. And so the goal of really the Beverly Willis Foundation and AIA has been to start to rewrite this narrative and to acknowledge that these strong women were out there, and just because they weren't written about in the history books doesn't mean that they didn't exist, and it doesn't mean that we can't rewrite the history books, that we can't go back and say, you know what, Mary Mahoney wasn't a bookkeeper, she was an architect, she worked for Frank Lloyd Wright, you know, all of these women were here, and we have a voice, and a lot of times it's a very good voice, and so it needs to be acknowledged. And
You know, there's one woman that you should look up her work, because she's my favorite, Julia Morgan, who practiced primarily out in California. And look at her, because I know that you would love her work. Somewhat of a Spanish Moorish touch, but elegant. And her design really expanded beyond buildings. You know, I've talked about how good design of a home expands out into the garden. And she is just a prime example of that kind of work. And her homes are treasured and very, very sought after.
On this ruler, Women Rulers of 20th Century American Architecture and Design, which literally is a ruler. I note that not only do you have names and birth date and if they've passed the death date, but also what they primarily are known for. And to give people an example here, if I can find it again, there was a woman who did the Disneyland landscapes, are in here. And then there was another who did the Pepsi headquarters. So it's really nice to see the impact when you go through these
Right.
names. This is very telling.
absolutely.
Yeah, it is.
Absolutely.
And also, you know, not just in design, as we've talked about it, but also in critic form.
Oh yes.
Huxtable, for instance, who's still writing today. Some of her books have kind of shaken And
Completely shaken.
How so? How so?
very controversial, but very deep thinking, very, very penetrating in her thought processes about architecture and design, and some of the barriers,
absolutely.
the gender barriers in the profession. I heard the books that I've read, the titles just all of a sudden slipped my mind, but very, very powerful books.
Oh, yeah.
She's a very strong voice in the industry still.
And people listen. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
and I think it's very important that women in design, whether it's in architecture or it's in industrial design, product design, art in general, and women need to understand that they do have a voice and they need to voice it. They need to voice their opinion and say, I'm here and you can't just ignore me, and I do have an opinion. And I think what's missing a lot of times is a sense of pride in the fact that you're a woman in design, not just that your design is good, but that you've kind of stepped outside of this societal pressure of it's just a male-dominated